Yeah, you were like, I'm worried that when you watch this, you're gonna judge me, and I'm like, no, I'm with you. I'm with you all the way.
I was
Love
like, are you
him.
ready to fall in love with a fish?
Hi, I'm Eliza.
And I'm the specimen. Give me a hard-boiled egg, please.
Yeah, love those.
And
That's our
we're
bond. We share them.
the Ghouls Next Door media literacy show from a horror lens or explore the real life, historical, psychological, societal influences behind our cinematic fears. And we're kicking off a new series. It's a new year, new us, and we're talking about monsters and love.
Hmm.
Loving
And
monsters.
it is love and monsters, but also it's like society.
Yeah.
Why does society make love harder?
And
What
like,
are they
who decides who the
doing?
monsters are?
Yeah,
I think that's the big question.
that is the big question. We ask it a lot on the show. We do. And we're not going
Yeah,
to stop. All we do is ask this question.
that's true. That's true. We're going to be covering a Guillermo del Toro film that we have not covered. I have wanted to cover it for a long time. Anyone who listens to the Ghouls knows I'm a big Del Toro fan,
Hmm.
and we sadly haven't covered a lot of his films. Like, we haven't done Pan's Labyrinth, which is one of my favorite films of all time.
Hmm. I'm
We
surprised by that, to be honest.
Yeah, I know we've only covered Crimson Peak, and
Yeah.
we cover that for episode about Guillermo del Toro, which you can find. It is audio only. It's back before we made video content, but we talk about his style and his life and little bits and pieces of him. And we do have that video available as audio only on YouTube. And you can
Hmm.
also, I don't know, search the archives to find it. It is, again, because it's pre-video, it could be anyone's idea of what it might be.
Hmm.
Don't hold us accountable for what you find there.
It was the past us where we're not as organized. I don't know. We were a lot of things. We were growing. We were healing as people. It was the before
Hmm.
time, before we really got our podcast acts together.
Yeah. It was a great series, though. We were talking about horror directors, and so is Del Toro. We also talked about Anna Lily and Mirpur, and
Hmm.
a two-part Jordan Peele episode. So that was,
Yeah.
and we did another two-part Jordan Peele episodes this past year. So
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll come back around to Del Toro to talk about his fantasy worlds that he builds. I'll talk a bit about it
Hmm.
too in this, but we are talking about his film Shape of Water, which is not a horror film overtly.
Yeah.
The way that he creates stuff, it can be pretty horrific, like the circumstances. He has a really great way of softening horrific things to make them digestible and
Hmm.
relatable and beautiful too. I think there's so much beauty in this film, totally worth all of the awards, all of the attention that he puts in it, in creating
Hmm.
these creatures and um, the storyline and the characters that are in there. And it clearly is like a place of love for him. Well, why don't we hop in so we can start this year off with a positive film, a film we enjoy. That's not to say we won't enjoy the other films, we just haven't seen them yet. So,
Yeah. And in
uh,
this one, we get to see you as a fish, which is great. 10 out of 10.
yes.
Really love the cosplay for those who we get to view Gabe be. So cool.
Yes, if you are listening, check out our YouTube video, or just like check out our social media to see me as the specimen. And also leave a comment if you on how you feel about this film. Remember to like and subscribe. You know how it is. It's a new year, and we love the support. We'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite Guillermo del Toro film? I'd love to hear
Hmm.
that too. If there's directors like him that you think we should cover, maybe are underrated, also let us know that too.
Yeah.
Happy to hear and to share that. And let's hop in to Shape of Water. So Shape of Water is from 2017, and it's about At a top secret research facility in the 1960s, a lonely janitor forms a unique relationship with an amphibious creature that is being held in captivity, directed by Guillermo del Toro. And yeah, it is that. So, Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water is a mesmerizing fairy tale that shows us that love can transcend language and species. Set in the Cold War era of the 1960s, the story follows Elisa Esposito, a lonely nonverbal woman working as a janitor at a sketchy, top secret government laboratory. She lives her nice life in the sun, and then she goes and works in the seedy underground at night.
Mhm.
And her routine life of small moments of bliss, bookended by this mundanity of labor, takes an extraordinary turn when she discovers a classified experiment. And this secret weapon is actually a mysterious amphibious, hard boiled, egg loving creature captured from the Amazon.
Mhm.
Their moments are super sweet and genuine because they're just connecting on this natural level of being outsiders
Mhm.
in such a a bland, colorless world. Like
Yeah.
Guillermo definitely desaturates the film a lot, and that's intentional. He originally wanted it to be black and white.
Mm.
But with the color being instead intentional, and like what colors pop, the reds that are in there versus like a very blue landscape. Like that's all like
Mhm.
really adds to the storytelling and the dim, kind of dreary atmosphere of her
Yeah.
life before he showed up. And Eliza forms a deep and unexpected bond with the creature, communicating through sign language and gestures, finding solace in their shared isolation. And she later explains to her good friend Giles that when he looks at me, the way he looks at me, he does not know what I lack or how I am incomplete. He sees me for what I am, as I am. He's happy to see me every time, every day.
Mm.
And when you have like a nonverbal character who speaks in sign language, you kind of we talk about this all the time. You always run that risk of having like this special, differently abled person. I didn't feel
Mhm.
that with her.
No,
That was
yeah.
a part of her, and she was able to talk to him because of that. But it was never like this is the thing that saves him.
Mhm.
It was like her love that saves him, right?
Yeah,
It's like
just the
in
fact she
his
had
love.
empathy.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah.
So I will say that is really nice. And um if you see my video about some of the several mermaid books that I read this year, one of my favorites features the use of sign language to communicate with these aquatic
Mhm.
beings, because there are more than just vocal ways to communicate and share experiences. And that was something I really, really loved about that book. Like it made it stand out. There's
Mhm.
so much I loved about it. But In the Drowning Deep has that aspect to it where there's deaf characters. They felt fully realized. And again, there's like this kind of power of being able to communicate with something that isn't human because
Mhm.
we're using sign language. Like
Yeah.
I use sign language for my dog. So
Yeah.
um people could do it. So as she falls harder for this being who sees her, the government, led by the cruel Colonel Strickland, plans to dissect the creature in the name of science. And Eliza hatches a daring plan to rescue him with the help of her friend Giles, the queer artist neighbor, and Zelda, her supportive and caring coworker bestie. The film focuses on characters who exist on the fringes of society. So you have Eliza, who's a nonverbal woman, Giles, who's a closeted gay man, and Zelda, who's a black woman navigating a racist society, and then the Amphibian Man, who's a literal outsider. And each of
Mhm.
them faces discrimination and marginalization, yet they find strength in their shared humanity. And the story critiques how society labels and ostracizes those who are different while celebrating the beauty of individuality and acceptance. They're a little cute found family, and I love
Mhm.
them, and I wish I could spend more time with them.
Yeah.
But that's not how it has to be. So
Movies are short.
movies are short, and like they had to go. They had
Yeah.
to get he needs
Chaos was
water.
happening. Yeah,
He
yeah,
needs water. It's
yeah.
dry
Yeah.
on land.
Mhm.
But framed by the themes of acceptance, resistance, and the power of connection in the face of oppression, Del Toro offers us a brilliant tale of found family and love, blending romance, suspense, and Del Toro's signature dark whimsy and beautiful practical makeup.
Mhm.
He does a creature well.
Mhm.
The Shape of Water challenges our perception of humanity and monsters, offering a story as enchanting as it is heartbreaking. So, one of the big things I wanted to talk about on this episode and why I really pushed to have uh, this film be covered on the Ghouls is specifically the subversion of the submersive love interest. So, there is
Mhm.
a horror film that is a historic piece of horror media, right? Like it
Yeah.
is like one of the first like ones that it had impact, and that's A Creature from the Black Lagoon. But it, like many films of that time, suffered from racism and
Mhm.
otherism because of the time period that it was made in. And you know, yeah, it's like Birth of the Nation
Yeah.
adjacent.
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
definitely super problematic. Did not
Yeah.
age well. It was trying to send a message of what people should be scared of that was messed up,
Yeah.
and untrue.
And that,
Yeah.
I mean, that was just the time period. That was the tools that they were using. So
Mhm.
totally get it. Like that that's who those are the people who are making the movies.
Yeah,
So
they were in charge.
when I saw this film and I remember reading a little bit about Del Toro's inspiration, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, for all the monster loving girlies out there,
Yeah.
I know that like monster erotic romance novels are super in. Okay. This is before its time because it's in now, right? But like, there's true romance and it's really sweet and it's cute and it's sexy too, which is
Mhm.
such a weird thing to say about a fish man.
Yeah.
But Del Toro did that, and he wanted to do that and be specific with it. And even if it was just him kind of like nerding out and using his powers for good, it has a really big impact because of its like subversion of
Mhm.
this like profound film that has existed for so long.
Yeah.
So Del Toro's tender love story is wrapped in a deliberate act of cinematic reclamation. It takes the foundation of the 1950s creature features like Creature from the Black Lagoon and flipped their racial and gender anxieties on their heads. Like, it's purposeful that it takes
Mhm.
place in the 1950s and that Eliza has such an obsession with movies too,
Mhm.
because it is her escape. So it's like that's how powerful films were,
Mhm.
because this isn't just a fishman romance, it's a complete subversion of the tropes that once painted monsters as symbols of racial fear and cultural otherness. Del Toro turned the ethnographical monster into a figure of empathy and love. And in
Mhm.
1950s America, horror movies were often vessels for the era's social anxieties. It always is. So the social anxieties of that time were fears around race, gender, and desegregation. So the Creature from the Black Lagoon uses its titular monster, known as the Gill Man, as a symbol of evolutionary and racial otherness. He's a hybrid, half human, half fish, stuck in the moment life crawled out of the water. And this hybrid identity taps into fears of racial mixing and the erosion of white purity. And the movie frames the creature as a predator lurking beneath the surface and threatening white womanhood. Like, that's the scene
Mhm.
that people see and they go, oh, that's scary. But Guillermo del Toro first encountered Creature from the Black Lagoon as a child, and where others saw that horrific scene of this predator like sneaking up from under her, like Jaws level fear, Del Toro saw heartbreak. He describes being mesmerized by the underwater scenes of the creature swimming beneath Julie Adams, saying, the creature was the most beautiful design I've ever seen. I love that the creature was in love with her, and I felt an almost existential desire for them to end up together. And of course, it didn't happen. So
Mhm.
Del Toro wasn't content to just leave it there. And as a kid, he began sketching stories of the Gill Man finding love, vowing to one day correct the narrative. Now, fast forward to The Shape of Water, and that childhood dream becomes reality in a love story where the monster gets the girl. You know, he was like, he saw it as romantic, that he's like
Mhm.
swimming under her and beautiful, like poetic, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like a total different way to take a scene like that.
Yeah.
And so, in The Shape of Water, Del Toro reclaims the creature archetype and washes away its racialized fear mongering. The amphibian man is no longer a figure of terror or racial othering. Instead, he's a misunderstood being who forms a mutual, loving connection with Eliza, a nonverbal and otherwise marginalized human woman. And this radical
Mhm.
storytelling, one that swaps fear for empathy and alienation for intimacy. So, Eliza doesn't see the amphibian man as a threat. She's just honestly a very nice person.
Yeah.
So,
Empathy.
um, she, like me, will, humanize
Yeah, it was like
anything
when you
that's
texted me, I was like,
remotely
I was
human.
yeah, you were like, "I'm worried that when you watch this, you're gonna judge me," and I'm like, "No, I'm with you. I'm with you all the way."
I was
Love
like, "Are you
him.
ready to fall in love with a fish?"
Yeah, and the
Because if
answer is
you
yes.
don't,
It's
I
a
might be
question of empathy at
suspicious.
that point. Like, I
Yeah.
get, like, you don't have to wanna date him, but you have to at least empathize with him,
Yeah. But then
at the very
they
least.
also made him hot.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just like
both.
how kind he is. I don't know.
Mhm.
So she sees him as someone like herself, isolated, misunderstood, and mistreated by a society obsessed with power and control. And by making the government agents the true villains, Del Toro critiques the colonial, dehumanizing gaze that sought to capture and categorize the creature in the 1950s and in this film. And the
Mhm.
term ethnographiable monster, as used in an article by the University of Colorado Boulder, Race, Gender, and Terror, the Primitive in 1950s Horror Films, Genders, captures the colonialist gaze in 1950s horror. Like King Kong before him, the creature in Black Lagoon was portrayed as an exotic other to be studied, dominated, and ultimately destroyed. The
Mhm.
scientific expedition to capture the creature mirrored real world colonial practices of ethnography, where non Western peoples were displayed as relics of a primitive past. There
Mhm.
was literally people in zoos.
Yep.
There's people zoos. It wasn't just an episode of Futurama or
Yeah.
Steven Universe.
Yep.
Okay. In The Shape of Water, Del Toro turns this narrative inside out because the amphibian man isn't something to be studied or feared. He's someone to be loved. And his difference isn't a threat, it's a source of beauty and connection. And unlike the 1950s film that positioned the monster's desire as predatory, The Shape of Water emphasizes consent, mutual respect, and tenderness. He is not a predator in any form. He only
Mhm.
comes when he is called. She barges in, ready to go, and he stands right up, like it's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, we're
But
in love. It's
up
great.
until then, he's like, I just like it appears he's just very thankful for the kindness that she's showing him. And they are clearly
Mhm.
falling for one another in a very genuine way. But there was never like even as an animal, like the one time he behaves as an animal, like killing a cat, like he didn't behave like an animal in a predatory sense towards humans,
Mhm.
which is like thankfully
Yeah.
a lot of monster romance uh, takes the wrong notes and
Ah.
does that because this becomes more than a love story. It is a cultural correction. By allowing the amphibian man and Eliza to find love, Del Toro challenges the historical use of monsters to encode racial and cultural anxieties, and he turns a figure once used to reinforce fear of the other into a symbol of liberation. The amphibian man is a metaphor for the beauty of hybridity, of crossing boundaries, breaking down barriers, and finding humanity in what society deems monstrous. Through his reimagining, Del Toro offers us a vision of love and difference as sources of strength and beauty, not tragedy or fear. And in the
Mhm.
end, young Del Toro finally got his wish, because the monster got the girl.
Mhm.
Um, and this just leads me to just my appreciation of Del Toro, which is why I love Del Toro and his approach to his stories and the
Mhm.
characters that he puts on screen. Like every single thing is intentional and it's beautifully done. And you can really appreciate and love someone's work
Yeah.
without idolizing and putting anyone on a pedestal, which is not what I'm
Mhm.
doing. But I do want to highlight some of the reasons why I really appreciate his approach to media and the stories that he's told, and why I think it's this delicate tango with trauma. So
Mhm.
seasoned Ghouls fans know that I am a huge fan of Del Toro's work. In fact, one of my Black Tribbles names, we get Tribble designations of what we geek out about, and my original name is obviously Horror Tribble. But when I became an official Tribble, my secondary designation was fauna tribble, and that was referencing Del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, which
Mm.
lovingly haunted much of my youth. So I'm a big fan, and I'm in constant awe of not only Del Toro's art, but his ability to turn monsters into sympathetic creatures and humans into vicious monsters. He turns it around.
Yeah.
But also his delicate and honest approach to covering trauma in film overall. Del Toro masterfully weaves trauma into his films, and his approach is as heart wrenching as it is cathartic.
Mhm.
We can experience these moments in time that he's like re envisioning and making magical,
Mhm.
to kind of soften the blow of what those traumas could be. Also, like the soundtrack haunts me forever from Pan's
Yeah.
Labyrinth.
I remember watching it at my 13th birthday party. Like
Aw.
that was what we did. We put it on like while we were running around.
Yeah, it's one of the only, like, DVDs I own,
Yeah.
and I owned that in, like, high school and would watch it all the time, and, like, I watch TV a lot, and so if movies came on TV, I'd watch them all the time, but this was the
Mhm.
one where it was like, "I'm purposely putting this
I want
in,"
to keep this
and
forever.
I watched
Yeah.
the bonus features, like, I was like, "This is what I wanna do." Like,
Yeah.
watching Pan's Labyrinth, I was like, "This is so beautiful," it tickled all of the things that I love,
Mhm.
um and it was so wonderfully crafted. It was like the storybook opening, and so I it really was inspired me to kind of pursue filmmaking even more
Yeah.
seriously because I was like, "Oh, you can just like geek out and make beautiful things and also kind of express things that are troubling you or historical things as well in
Yeah.
such a beautiful way." So,
One
like,
day there'll be an
what?
interview of you where
Yeah.
you're like, I was watching Pan's Labyrinth as a child and it inspired me to do this. And then just like you was saying, BBC movies when I
Mhm.
was young inspired me to do this. And then you'll have that as like your
He'll be my
thing.
creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You hear that, Del Toro? Make another season of your show and bring me on as one of the directors.
Don't be dumb.
So Del Toro doesn't just tell personal stories of pain. He roots them in the soil of history, and his films are always set against backdrops of societal upheaval where trauma is both individual and collective. So if you take Pan's Labyrinth, Ophelia's journey happens during the chaos of post Civil War Spain, where fascism tears families apart, and her magical labyrinth is more than an escape, it's her way of processing the violence and terror of her reality.
Hmm.
It's actively happening. And that's really what the horror is. And then on top of that, we're seeing like the pale man.
Hmm.
Similarly, The Devil's Backbone places orphan children in the crumbling ruins of war torn institution, their personal grief mirroring the scars of the Spanish Civil War. I also love that he like ties it back. It's
Yeah,
a
he
lot of
loves
like
putting history in
colonial
there.
Spain,
Yeah.
but that's okay. um, by tying individual trauma to historical atrocities, we see how systems like war, fascism, and colonialism leave lasting scars, not just on societies, but on the individuals caught in their wake. And his work is a reminder that trauma doesn't happen in isolation. He also has a knack for focusing on trauma through the eyes of children or marginalized characters. And that juxtaposition of their innocence against the brutality of the world makes their pain hit harder. We
Hmm.
are going to find empathy much more in these people who feel like the most undeserving of that pain.
Yeah.
And that's not to like invalidate like all the other characters who are adults. Like I felt just as strongly for Ophelia's mom and the rebels as I did
Hmm.
for Ophelia.
Yeah.
So think of Ophelia, Carlos from Devil's Backbone, and Eliza from The Shape of Water. These characters endure incredible suffering, yet their stories are marked by resilience. Eliza, for example, doesn't let her nonverbal communication define or limit her. Instead, she transforms her trauma into a source of strength, finding love and connection in a world that tries to silence her. Like the Colonel has that discussion when they see her gills, where he's like,
Hmm.
how could anyone do that to like a child? So it's like clear that she's had like her
Hmm.
foundational years were traumatic, and the fact that she's still like walking around as this like bundle of joy, like she's
Yeah.
just this like beautiful presence, is perseverance, and like it is in itself like an act of rebellion against a
Hmm.
world that is trying to tear her down in other ways. And
Yeah.
so Del Toro emphasizes that these characters aren't victims, right? They're survivors who reclaim their agency even when everything around them feels insurmountable. And in Del Toro's hands, monsters are never just monsters. They're metaphors, complex reflections of the trauma, fear, and humanity's dark impulses. His monsters are often misunderstood or sympathetic, while the humans are the ones committing the real atrocities. They're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of like extra, like it in the way that monsters in like 1950s or classic horror were sometimes used to like monstrosize just people based on being different, like just
Mm-hmm.
monstrosizing entire groups of people by equating them. Instead, he's monstrosizing, like he's using this monster to show like, but the real monsters don't look like that. Like
Yeah.
we need to like actually pay attention,
Mm-hmm.
because they look
There's
like
no
this guy.
static being good.
Yeah.
Like you have to work on yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, You've been told wrong this whole time." And,
Mm-hmm.
like, that's really fun. Like, the
Anyone can
fawn,
be a monster.
from my namesake, Fauna, in Pan's Labyrinth, and the Pale Man, same guy as Shape of Water Man, are
Mm-hmm.
manifestations of Ophelia's internal and external struggles. The Amphibian Man in the Shape of Water is a figure of otherness, a being dismissed and dehumanized by society, much like Eliza herself. And even in Crimson Peak, the ghosts haunting the story aren't real. They're embodiments of grief, lingering memories of past violence. Spoilers,
Mm-hmm.
sorry. Also, old film that no one loves and appreciates, but I love
It's
a
okay.
gothic film, period. So
Yeah.
you can, like, again, would really want to make a goth film. Anyway, Del Toro flips the script on traditional horror by using monsters not as antagonists, but as vessels for exploring the misunderstood pain that his human characters experience. And while monsters get our sympathy, it is the humans who become the true villains, embodying cruelty, greed, and oppression. The I forget if he's the colonel or what have you in Pan's Labyrinth, but that is like one of the scariest men I've ever experienced in my life. And just when he's just there, like he doesn't have to even
Yeah.
do anything. It's just his presence and that like power and just innate evil
Mm-hmm.
is so much scarier than the Pale
Yeah.
Man. Like I because he believes in the power of imagination and fantasy to cope with trauma. His characters often enter fantastical worlds or relationships to process their pain, reclaiming agency over their lives. So Ophelia's labyrinth is both her escape and her resistance against her stepfather's violence. Eliza's love for the amphibian man allows her to transcend the oppressive boundaries of her life. Even Edith in Crimson Peak transforms a story of betrayal and horror into one of personal strength and survival. Storytelling and imagination aren't just escapism. They're tools for survival, for finding beauty and purpose in even the darkest times. And for Del
Mm-hmm.
Toro, trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. While his characters carry the weight of their pain, they also find paths to healing through connection and empathy. So, in the Shape of Water, Eliza and the amphibian man heal each other through their love and acceptance. He
Mm-hmm.
literally heals her when
Yeah.
they come to terms with who they actually are and are in a place where they can grow. In Devil's Backbone, the children find strength in solidarity, bonding together to face their fears. In Crimson Peak, a tale of betrayal and gothic horror, Edith rises above her trauma with strength and determination. So Del Toro emphasizes that while trauma leaves scars, those scars can be softened through human connection, love, and acts of resistance. And I love Guillermo del Toro's work because he doesn't depict trauma as suffering. He shows it as a transformative force, and his characters are shaped by their pain, but not defined by it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they find ways to rise above, to resist, and to heal. And through his monsters, his historical allegories, and his boundless empathy, Del Toro reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is light. There is beauty in the broken. There is hope in the monstrous. So, if you're like me and you've ever felt haunted by Del Toro's work in the best way possible, take a moment to appreciate how his films not only explore the depths of pain, but celebrate the strength it takes to overcome it and
Mm-hmm.
put you into a fairy tale.
Yeah. And it's just like thinking of like everything that's happening in the world is like that's kind of what we need right now, like to
Hmm.
exist. I mean, in most time periods, to exist is stressful, but also right now, to
Yeah,
exist
for
is
sure.
stressful. And we need kind of a little bit of magic to get through it and to process all the traumas that are taking place. So I don't think
Hmm.
films like this will ever cease relevancy.
Yeah. Because there's always gonna be an other, and it changes who those others are.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the others that are gonna be targeted soon are, and have been actively targeted for years now, happen to look like Guillermo del Toro and myself. So
Mhm.
it it does feel very real.
Yeah.
And maybe we're not exoticized, but monstrous.
Mhm.
There's new terms, migrant violence, which isn't
Yeah.
real. Migrant
Yeah.
crime, not a real thing.
Yeah.
No way to determine what that is.
Mhm.
Those kinds of things like that. They've built up a fictional monster while the real monsters look like a guy on TV in a tie.
Mhm. Yep. It's bleh. But,
It is blue.
yeah. But I will say, I also wanna give, like, a little shout out to you, Gabe, because like, wow, like, you performed that entire thing with the most distracting sensory-wise things
Face.
all over
It's a
you.
lot. It's a lot. I'll
So
tell
just
you.
some extra props to you. I know you were struggling at various parts. You need to give yourself credit. You have, like, gills or, like, fins right next to your eyes.
I do,
So just
and
to
I can see
honor
them at all times.
yeah, it's a lot. I can't even deal with, like, fake blood on me, so, like, you were killing it. Just wanted to shout that out for everybody.
Thank you.
So what I want to talk about in my section is just because, like, when this releases, we will be right there. We will be right there as we experience a second Trump presidency. And this
Mhm.
film came out when the first one was happening. So uh, I found a decent amount of articles to support that it was in many ways calling out what was taking place societally. And the reason it won a bunch of awards is because it was so beautiful and topical and everything else, but also because of what was happening in the world. Really just made it hit extra hard for
Mhm.
audiences watching. So, as much as I wish it wasn't, The Shape of Water is just as relevant right now as we brace ourselves for a potential events and consequences of another Trump presidency. The film flips the Trumpian promise of Make America Great Again on its head by showing the real people who are harmed by that declaration, even those benefiting most from the culture of this supposed great America, are miserable in this film. Everything's
Mhm.
bleak. They're like the 1950s, make America great again. Everything's sad.
Yeah.
Everything's colorless. Uh, all the nails that stick out have been hammered down. Everyone is miserable.
Mhm.
It is not some great and beautiful time to be romanticized. Um,
Yeah, and
so
that's
we,
like 1950s is also like honestly the time that when people say make America great again, that's what they're envisioning. Is that specific
yeah,
time period. So to make it like awful is very intentional.
yeah, and like we just get to see, like, everyone, like, suffering, but, like, being
Mhm.
told everything's great, like, multiple times Strickland's like, "It's America, it's gonna be great, like, who could
Yeah.
hurt you?" And it's like, "You, bro. You literally
Literally
you."
you.
Um, so there's just, like we kind of talked about it a lot in many of our series around now,
Very true.
where it's just, like, that time period we've been talking about a lot lately, and then also just the panic that was taking place, the paranoia that was taking place, the kind of just uneasiness, and feeling of otherness that was just widespread during that time period. So we just got done our satanic panic. Um, and
Mhm.
that is the time period we're in this film. So even though it's not directly a satanic panic film, it is covering similar vibes. The depiction of paranoia in the 1960s eerie, cold dystopia like environment, spearheaded by a Trump-esque character like Strickland, is based on the same paranoia we saw during the very real 1950s and 60s, which had the toxic masculinity, the homophobia, being socially accepted, America just doing a lot of awful stuff. And if you want to hear about some of the terrible things the US government did during the 1960s, highly recommend checking out our They Clone Tyrone episode because,
Mhm.
ow. There's lots of stuff that, especially when history is trying to be rewritten and watered down to be more palatable to certain people with my skin tone, um,
Mhm.
it's extra important to know that that wasn't a great time. So I actually found an article in The Conversation that goes over the connections between The Shape of Water and Trump's first presidency, titled The Shape of Water, an allegorical critique of Trump, from The Conversation. And they describe the film's main characters as, these are Americans who live lives of quiet oppression in the past tense America that shimmers, mythical and revered, at the heart of Trump's campaign promise. The film both upholds and undermines the old mythologies that can provide comfort and reassurance to people whose lives have been disrupted by global trade, population movements, and the emergence of AI in the workplace. The character of Colonel Richard Strickland embodies. It's also funny, like Dick Strickland. He's a dick. The entire
Yeah.
time. He's the worst. Embodies the abuse of power and authoritarian tendencies. Strickland's cruel and domineering behavior towards the Amphibian Man and other characters reflects the authoritarian style of leadership often associated with Trump. Strickland's belief in his superiority, white supremacy, and
Mhm.
his willingness to use violence and intimidation to maintain control serve as a critique of the authoritarian and often oppressive tactics used by Trump's administration. And the Conversation article continues that the Cold War was in full swing in this film, and the dichotomy between the United States and Russia, between good and evil, is both referenced and undermined. Specifically, Americans and Russians are in conflict, but it's a Russian agent who acts ethically.
Mhm.
It's kind of like questioning who are the monsters multiple times throughout the film.
Yeah.
And there is a traditional Main Street dessert shop, but the affable server turns out to be a vile racist and homophobe who
Mhm.
adopts a Southern accent for marketing purposes and is actually from Ottawa, Canada.
Yeah.
And the pies look appealing, but they are mass produced and taste terrible. And the store is part of a new phenomena, the franchise. The film is poised at the moment when authenticity is being lost to illusion. Much
Now's when
like,
we want to be great again.
yeah, much like the illusion that that was a great time that we all want to go back to. Uh, Showcasing the past in this way also says the quiet part out loud for Make America Great Again, because the past is shown for what it really was: deeply isolating, cruel, and unsafe for anyone who did not fit the status quo. Even those who were benefiting from their oppression were miserable and rotting on the inside, like Strickland's fingers.
Ugh.
Yeah. And the reason The Shape of Water is very much calling out Trump and those who believe in Make America Great Again is because that time period was selected and showcased intentionally, which Gabe definitely covered for the most part. So, like, the 1940s and 50s were not great. And if they were, then why were the characters we're following in the film struggling and fearful? Why did Strickland have a wife who had to put up with this disgusting behavior? Why was he so miserable? Why did he hate his kids? Why was
Mhm.
everyone having like kind of a hard time? If you already know your history, this won't be that interesting for you, but our characters are dealing with a lot of subtext that some people don't have.
Mm.
And that is
True.
intentionally being erased right now and watered down into an illusion of something good. Uh, when what was really happening was a ton of paranoia, oppression, and misery. And our characters are dealing with Cold War paranoia, satanic panic, post Red Scare paranoia, on top of not having rights or choice during this time period. And to be alive in the 1950s was to not be safe to be yourself. It was a denial of authenticity, because to be your authentic self was a threat to your safety,
Mhm.
and to be viewed with the same cruelty as Strickland views the Amphibian Man by an oppressive country. With that, it's important to know what else is influencing our characters' fear, specifically to disobey the powers that be. Like, why everyone was like, I totally get why we have to do this, but
Mhm.
this is scary. We have really real reasons to be terrified to stand up against this government agency who's trying to dissect and kill this innocent creature. Um, and it shows like why it's so important to fight anyway. Do things afraid, you know. And I
Mhm.
found this is just some history facts. I found it on the civil rights movement timeline and the timeline of women's rights in the U.S. This is stuff lots of people probably already know, but just in case you don't, during the 50s is when we had Brown versus Board of Education, where segregation starts to take place, basically ending racial segregation in public schools. Many schools remain segregated, but like Ruby Bridges and
Mhm.
folks like were
She's still
alive.
alive.
Like, she's not even old. Like,
Yeah. She's voting.
uh, those pictures were made black and white on purpose to make it seem like it was a bad long time
Mhm.
ago, and it wasn't. So 1957, Eisenhower signs the Civil Rights Act of 1957 into law to help protect voter rights. This allows federal prosecution of those who suppress another's right to vote. 63, the Equal Pay Act is passed by Congress, promising equitable wages for the same work, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, or sex of the worker. So essentially, like, if this film is in the beginning of the 1960s, end of the
Mm-hmm.
1950s, none of these people that we're seeing on film really had any rights to show for it. Like, they either
Yeah.
just got it, were about to get it, or like don't have any, and are perceived as less than, or perceived as the equivalents of the Amphibian Man during this time period by society. And in 1964, title, I don't know Roman numerals, V117, thank you, Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act passes, preventing employment discrimination due to race, color, sex, religion, or national origin, and also establishes the EEOC to help prevent workplace discrimination. In 1965, Supreme Court establishes the right for married couples to use contraception.
Mm.
You were not allowed to use contraception before 1965. So Strickland and his wife didn't have a choice but to have those kids he doesn't like.
Mm-hmm. Had to. Has to
Had
play those
to.
roles.
Mm-hmm. In 65, they also signed the Voting Rights Act. 68, Lyndon Johnson signs the executive order prohibiting sex discrimination by government contractors and requiring affirmative action plans for hiring women. So that's why there are not any women working in the higher positions of this government office, and they're only
Mm-hmm.
janitors and secretaries with no real power. Like, they're reclaiming the power in the film because they literally just got in the door. That
Yeah.
this was the position that was like, they are finally allowed to work. That was not allowed before. So President Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which also allows fair housing. 69, California adopts the nation's first no-fault divorce law, allowing divorce by mutual consent. So Strickland's wife literally had to put up with this man putting his
Mm-hmm.
rotting fingers in her face during sex. Like, she could not leave. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, maybe no-fault divorce is important because there are men like that who you
Mm-hmm.
are forced to be with and cannot leave. Uh, so the film takes place in the 60s, so none of what else I'm about to mention is legal yet, just for context. I mention it purely because many people do not realize, Gabe, we had a whole conversation about this,
Mm-hmm.
how recent all of this was and how easily these things can be taken away. These things are not set in stone. They were only reintroduced into law recently. So Title
9.
IX 5, 9?
9.
Title 9 of the Education Amendments prohibits sex discrimination in all aspects of education programs that receive federal support. This is until 72. Is the first time Supreme Court upholds the right to use birth control in unmarried couples.
Mm.
Uh, we had our first woman director of the New York Stock Exchange in 72 as well. 73, we had Roe v. Wade, which has already been overturned.
Mm-hmm.
74, housing discrimination on the basis of sex and credit discrimination against women were outlawed by Congress. That means women can have credit cards for the first time, and receive loans without like the permission of a husband or like signing of a father. We were people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and the court also ruled that it was illegal to force pregnant women to take maternity leave on the assumption that they are incapable of working in their physical condition. 75, the court denies the state's rights to exclude women from juries. You couldn't even be on a jury.
Could even be a peer.
My mom was born in 73.
Yeah.
In 78, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act bans employment discrimination against pregnant women. So if you were pregnant, you could not work. Or
Mm-hmm.
78, really. So The Shape of Water just like has all that in the background of everything that's happening. The characters that we're seeing fight and be strong and powerful and resilient don't even have rights in the context of their world. Like, everything
Yeah.
is dark and blue and sad for a reason. And it's like, one thing I'll end up talking about is like empathy and how important that is. But then also it's like, you see that the only people who actually are able to find like happiness in this bleak environment are the people who are so othered, because they still find moments where they have the capacity for empathy and like capacity to actually connect to other people.
Yeah, well,
So
because their self-worth and like personhood isn't intertwined with what society is telling them to do. So they're able to find it because they have to make it themselves.
exactly. So The Shape of Water also blurs the lines between humanity and monstrosity, which Gabe spoke about in their section. While the Amphibian Man is initially perceived as monster, it's the human characters. That's like Del Toro's thing. It's fantastic. We
Mhm.
just need to show that being good is not a static state of being. It is constant work. The film challenges viewers to reconsider their definitions of what it means to be human and what constitutes a monster, suggesting that true monstrosity lies in cruelty and a lack of empathy. Um, it also like asks us to consider what is not allowed is actually if it's like if breaking the law is actually unjust or if breaking the
Mhm.
law is actually the most just thing you can do,
Mhm.
because laws have been used to oppress more than protect in this country. The story of Eliza and the Amphibian Man underscores the importance of empathy in the face of societal cruelty and discrimination, and the film reminds us, like Eliza, we must respond with empathy and love and compassion, regardless of differences. And the message is crucial as we navigate the challenges of a second Trump presidency, emphasizing the need for solidarity and resistance against oppression. So, like, people who had even more to lose were fighting. So we have to as well. And the film uses its narrative and characters to offer a poetic critique of Trump's presidency. It addresses issues like racism, sexism, and xenophobia, promoting themes of empathy and acceptance and humanism. And the portrayal of Strickland as a symbol of Trump's worst qualities. Is also important, like such as his toxic masculinity, his racism, his abuse of power. It serves as a powerful allegory for the societal impact of Trump's leadership and the film's depiction of the struggles faced by marginalized individuals and their capacity and compassion and resistance provides a hopeful vision and a more inclusive and empathetic future. At its core, The Shape of Water is a story about empathy and humanism. Eliza's compassionate relationship uh, with the other characters in the film and the amphibian man stands in stark contrast to Strickland's dehumanizing treatment of the creature. The dichotomy serves as an allegory for the broader societal divide between those who advocate for empathy, inclusion, and human rights, and those who promote division, exclusion, and humanization. Like you think about like trying to argue with somebody who just like doesn't like we agree to disagree, and it's like when it
Yeah.
comes to human rights, you can't do that.
Mhm.
And the film's emphasis on the importance of empathy and understanding critiques the lack of these qualities in Trump's leadership. So it's like if we want America to be like it was in the 1950s, it's going to come at the cost of like literally everyone's individuality and happiness.
Mhm.
Um and the last little thing I'll say is about like the loneliness in the film because we do see characters who are deeply lonely like on both sides. So Eliza finds empathy as Gabe you said basically is like they have to find self-actualization because it's not it's defined as right under the law and under society.
Mhm.
um but despite being very lonely and isolated, Eliza was able to establish real and meaningful connections because of her capacity for empathy. Her relationships with Giles and Zelda showcase this, that despite having less wealth and status, her life was filled with much more connection because of her empathy. Strickland, conversely, was lonely in a vastly different way because of his lack of empathy. He was benefiting from being cruel. Uh,
Mhm.
so he was literally rotting from the inside, and he was not shunned by society. In fact, he was widely accepted, but his life and world were entirely devoid of connection and empathy. Very like in a crowded room, but still feeling alone
Mhm.
kind of thing. Like he
Mhm.
really just like was this isolated, miserable being who was just perpetuating harm and pain because he didn't even allow himself to feel empathy because he was actually benefiting from like society was promoting and encouraging people to be cruel, to be and get like a benefit from that. Like even when he's like, "Well, it's fine if we don't pursue him anymore. Like I can't do this." And the guy's like, "Then you don't get to live anymore." Like the
Yeah.
above the general.
Mhm.
Um so he's like has to and
Mhm.
pays the ultimate price. So it's like it hurts everybody, even the people who like are supposed to be benefiting from it, like are
Yeah.
miserable too. Um,
Mhm.
they just don't see because of like how we teach everything that they're the problem because of this. You know,
Yeah.
I kind of spoke in a circle there, but I think you get what I mean. We've said
No,
it
no, I
before.
absolutely get it. Yeah. And I think like I appreciate kind of putting that into perspective too. Because yeah, I think there was in that time period, there was a lot of intentional work around establishing that time period as the the point of America is great. Like even
Mhm.
at that point, like they were trying so hard to establish themselves as like we did it, what like to oppose all of the changes that were happening. You know, like it was to justify like we don't need to have all those new rights and changes. Like it was a
Mhm.
fear of change that made them kind of like dig their heels in and say no, everything is perfect now. And so
Yeah.
then, you know, as things have changed, there's like people keep going back to that because it has been romanticized and changed into something that it never was, right? Like you were
Mhm.
saying, like um with, you know, film pictures being intentionally made in black and white to be perceived as longer ago than they are. And I think
Mhm.
that's also a reason why uh Del Toro didn't make this a black and white film, because it
Yeah.
is recent and it is timely for now too. Like it's bleak. I think
Yeah.
of even like Pleasantville, one of my favorite films of all time, and how like they existed in black and white and then he brought color, and the color was like being different and like living your truth and going against what was the perfection of what
Mhm.
Pleasantville existed as. And Pleasantville is this film where it is a TV show of that time period that
Yeah.
like epitomize like what was those traditional American values and purity
Yeah.
and beauty, and then these characters go in and they taint it with their at that time like modern lens of freedom. And
Mhm.
what I just really appreciated was like they didn't get color until they started to embrace the fact that like they were wrong, that it was
Yeah.
not perfect. And so like
Yeah.
that's what I think of for this. And you know, I also think of like I can't remember, but there was like this woman, like a radio host, who was like interviewing someone, being like, when you're saying make America great again, I want you to tell me precisely when it was great. Like, give me
Yeah.
a date and time of when it had
Yeah.
been great. And the lady, of course, is, you know, talking in circles the way that supporters do of that idea.
Mhm.
And so she's like, no, 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 tell me a date. Like, and for
Yeah.
everyone, right? Like, it was great for everyone, right? And, you know, of course, they're saying, like, it was always great. It was like, okay, then why are we making it again? It's like, okay, in the 50s, 60s, like, okay, when, you know, these, you know, rights and stuff weren't even available yet. And it's like, oh, when the founding fathers came, like, oh, you mean these people who owned people? Like,
Yeah.
what, like,
What are you saying?
precisely
Yeah.
when? Like, we really, like,
Yeah.
just say it out loud, because, you
Yeah.
know, that's really, you know, it's going around that. And I think this film and us covering it is super timely because we're seeing this times 10, because the
Yeah.
first presidency, as horrible as it was,
Yeah.
this one is, you know, already looking to be significantly worse in a lot of really scary ways. And so I think like if we can see the strength and the power in these characters who in a small way were able to go up against these monstrous large forces, and like is
Mhm.
still able to like find love and care for each other, empathy, to carve out those spaces for themselves, like that is so important when you are living in this oppressive society. And like, you know, she's doing her her menial labor
Yeah.
in this dark, damp, oppressive space and was still able to find love in there. And I think
Yeah.
like that's something that we're going to have to hold on to in the next 4
Mhm.
years.
It's so timely. I wish it wasn't. I wish it
I wish we were like, remember that horrible time way back when, and we
Yeah.
got out of it. Yeah,
Where
I
it's like
wish
also
too.
it's like unprecedented times where it's like these are super precedented times actually. It's actually
Yeah,
really
we've
unfortunate
seen it.
how precedented they are and not learned from. It
Yeah,
feels
we've done
unprecedented
this.
because we've erased all the history.
Yeah,
It
it feels
hurts.
unprecedented because we thought we were better than this.
Yeah, that
And that's
too.
the problem. We're not.
Yeah.
Like like we are, but like
Yeah.
society isn't. You know,
Yeah.
like and that's a problem, is like not being aware is what
Yeah.
led us to where we are. And it's just like preying. It's preying on people who are unaware and have that idolation of a time that
Mhm.
doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
In a world that can't exist. Like
Yeah.
you got to take us all out, and you ain't gonna do that. So
Yeah.
that the America you want is never gonna happen. So
Yeah.
so figure out a new one, because we're
Yeah.
coming. We're gonna make it. And
Mhm.
this might be the push that people need. So yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you enjoyed that film. I think Shape of Water is so one of my favorite
Mhm.
Del Toro films. Pan's Labyrinth is always going to be at the top for me. They're
Yeah.
also different that, it's always hard to choose one, so I won't. I mean, I even just love Hellboy. Like if
Yeah.
anyone was going to cover Hellboy in such a genuine, kind way and also like beautiful, it's going to be
Mhm.
Del Toro. So thank you, buddy. I love a nerd.
Yeah. This is
I
my
love
first
a
time
nerd.
seeing Shape of Water, so I really liked it. I was late to the game.
No, it's fine. I'm glad. I love using the show as a way for me to like force things that I love onto people. And
Yeah,
so
but
I
you're right
hope
about it. You were right
sometimes
to
I'm
make me
right.
watch it.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm
Even
like,
the ones where
oh
I'm like, "Oh, I wish I didn't watch that." I still am like glad I did, even though it was
yeah.
ouch, you know?
Yeah. 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 Well, tell us what you think of Shape of Water. What's your favorite Del Toro film? What are you finding support in? Like what is your form of resilience? Where's your family? Like
Yeah.
talk to us and share those spaces that you're carving out so that we can find those places too. Like we're going to need each other now more than ever, and so I hope you're still with us as the
Mhm.
years go by, because we're going to be here as long as we absolutely can. Like we're going to
Yeah.
continue to be a mouthpiece and to amplify voices and uplift ideas and do what we can to fight back
Mhm.
against this attack on media literacy, this attack on community and family, and the not traditional white supremacist vision of what people are. So
Yeah.
yeah. Like and subscribe, give us a comment, support us.
Yeah.
It'll mean a lot, and it'll help us continue to be a voice in the dark and to maybe one day make stories like Del Toro.
Mhm.
Right, well, don't get
I love
married.
it. Don't get married till it's your kids.
Yeah.
Hopefully not. Hopefully,
They could go in the water and be fish.
yeah.
Go
Find
be a
love in the
fish.
water. Yeah.
Yeah. Monster romance. Oh, also, if you have any monster romance books you want to recommend me, please do. I'd love it.
Yeah.
Bye.